A waitress warned the billionaire about his friend. The next day, a luxury car arrived at her door. Before we begin the story, please leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. David Sullivan sat in a luxurious New York cafe, ready to celebrate closing the biggest deal of his life with his best friend, Ryan Ford. The deal would solidify their company's place at the top of the industry, a dream David had worked tirelessly to achieve. As he adjusted his cufflinks, everything seemed perfect. Ryan, absorbed in his phone, barely noticed. David excused himself to the restroom, his thoughts consumed by the magnitude of the day. Unbeknownst to him, in his absence, the atmosphere at the table shifted. Emily, a young waitress, overheard a conversation that would change everything. Ryan, thinking no one was listening, was quietly speaking into his phone. "Everything's set," Ryan said. "David has no idea. Once the deal goes through, I'll have control of everything. By the time he realizes it, it'll be too late." "I've been planning this for months." Emily froze. Ryan, David's closest friend and business partner, was planning to betray him. She quickly retreated to the kitchen, heart pounding. She had no personal stake in this, but something about it gnawed at her conscience. Could she just walk away, knowing this? David returned, unaware of the conversation that had just unfolded. As he sat down, Emily, now determined, approached him quietly. "Excuse me, sir. I overheard something you need to know." David looked up, confused. "What is it?" Emily took a deep breath. "I overheard Ryan. He's planning to betray you. He said he's going to take everything from you once the deal is signed." David blinked, shocked. "What, are you sure?" Emily nodded. "I'm sure. I couldn't just let you go through with it without telling you." David's mind raced. Ryan had been his best friend for years. The idea that he was plotting betrayal was almost impossible to comprehend. Still, Emily's sincerity made David pause. "Thank you for telling me," David said, his voice quieter now. Emily nodded and stepped away as David processed the news. His world was suddenly shaking. Could Ryan really be capable of such betrayal? As Ryan returned to the table, unaware of the storm brewing, David felt a chill in the air. He couldn't ignore the doubt creeping into his mind. One thing was certain. He couldn't trust anyone, not even his best friend, until he knew the truth. The morning after his conversation with Emily, David found himself sitting at his desk, staring blankly at the stack of papers in front of him. The once comfortable warmth of his office now felt suffocating, as if the weight of the decision he had to make hung heavily in the air. Emily's warning echoed in his mind, each word drilling deeper into his thoughts. "He's planning to take everything from you, the company, the assets. It's all going to be his." The coldness of that accusation made David's stomach twist with unease. Could it be true? Could Ryan, the man he had trusted like a brother, really betray him? David leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline outside his office window. The world below seemed to carry on as usual, people hustling, taxis honking, and the rhythm of New York continuing as if nothing had changed. But for David, everything had changed in a matter of hours. The deal, which had once felt like the pinnacle of his career, now seemed like the sharpest knife, poised to cut everything he had worked for to pieces. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't. But as the minutes dragged on, the more he realized that the possibility of betrayal was not just a fleeting thought. It was a real threat, one that he had to confront head-on. There was no room for hesitation anymore. If Ryan had been planning this for months, then David was already behind. He needed to act, and fast. With a deep breath, David stood up from his desk and paced the room. His thoughts were a whirlwind, but one thing was clear. He needed proof. Emily's words alone weren't enough to make the kind of decision that would change the course of his life. If he confronted Ryan without the truth, without undeniable evidence, he risked losing everything. Not just the company, but his dignity and trust in his own judgment. David picked up his phone and dialed a number that he hadn't called in years. Julian, a private investigator he had worked with on a few business matters. Julian was sharp, discreet, and trusted in ways most people weren't. This was going to be a delicate situation, and David needed someone who knew how to navigate the murky waters of deception and betrayal. The phone rang for a moment before Julian's voice came on the line, calm and professional as always. "David, it's been a while. What's going on?" David didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Julian, I need your help." "It's about Ryan. I've got a feeling he's been planning something behind my back, something that could destroy everything I've worked for. I need you to look into his financials, his accounts, everything. I need proof." There was a pause on the other end, but Julian's response was immediate. "You've got it. I'll get on it right away. I'll keep you updated." David hung up the phone, his heart pounding in his chest. Now the only thing left to do was wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Over the next few days, David tried to go about his regular routine, attending meetings, reviewing contracts, making calls. But everything felt different. He kept glancing at his phone, wondering if Julian had found anything yet. He kept watching Ryan, whose behavior seemed just the same. Smooth, confident, the same easygoing charm that had made him so successful. But David couldn't shake the feeling that every word, every gesture, every smile was just a well-rehearsed act to cover up what Ryan was really planning. David couldn't get Emily's warning out of his head. He replayed her words again and again, trying to decipher whether he had misinterpreted something. But the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was a betrayal, a well-executed plan that Ryan had been working on for months, maybe even years. As the days passed, David's suspicion grew. He began noticing subtle things in Ryan's behavior. His sudden insistence on rushing through important details, his reluctance to make any firm commitments about the deal, and the occasional slip of impatience when David asked for clarifications. Ryan, who had once been so eager to collaborate, now seemed distant, as though he was holding back something. David knew he couldn't let this go on any longer. The truth had to come to light, no matter the cost. If Ryan had been siphoning money or setting up secret accounts, David needed to expose it before it was too late. And if what Emily had overheard was true, it was already too late for any trust to remain. David stood up from his desk again and paced the room. He felt his pulse quicken. Time was running out. That evening, as he headed home, he couldn't stop thinking about the magnitude of what was happening. He had built everything from the ground up. This company, his success, his reputation. And now, it was all in jeopardy. He couldn't let Ryan destroy it all. He had to act first. The next morning, David woke up early, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on his chest. He knew what he had to do, but the thought of confronting Ryan, his best friend, his partner, the person who had been by his side for so long, felt like stepping into the unknown. The idea of betrayal was one thing, but facing it head-on was something else entirely. After a quick breakfast, David dressed in his usual crisp suit, his face set with determination. His hair was meticulously styled, his demeanor cold and professional, but inside, his mind was racing. He wasn't just about to confront a business partner. He was about to confront someone who had been like family to him. David's phone buzzed just as he was about to leave. It was a message from Julian. "I've got the information. Call me when you can." David's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the proof he needed. He grabbed his coat and headed out the door, determined to face whatever came next. He had been in this game for years, but nothing had prepared him for the storm that was about to hit. As David stepped into his car and drove toward Julian's office, his thoughts were consumed by one thing. He had no choice but to confront Ryan. He had trusted him with everything, but now trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not anymore. David's hands gripped the steering wheel of his car as he parked outside Julian's office, the cool morning air swirling around him. He had made it this far. He had taken the first step toward uncovering the truth. But the closer he got to confronting the situation head-on, the more his confidence began to waver. Every thought he had from the last few days seemed to spin around in his head like a whirlwind. Was he just being paranoid? Was it possible that Emily had misunderstood something? David didn't want to believe it, but the truth of what he had overheard was too clear to ignore. Once the deal goes through, I'll have control of everything. Ryan's words haunted him like a specter in the back of his mind. He had built this company with Ryan, trusted him with everything. But now, in the blink of an eye, all that history was cast into doubt. The foundation of his life, his career, his trust in his best friend, was cracking. He stepped out of the car, straightening his suit jacket, as though the action could bring some semblance of order to the chaos swirling inside him. He didn't have time to waste on uncertainty. He had to know if Ryan was truly capable of betrayal. He had to know if his suspicions were grounded in reality or just a product of his overactive imagination. Julian's office was tucked away in a quiet part of the city, a place where the noise of Manhattan's bustling streets seemed distant, almost irrelevant. As David entered, the usual hum of the office felt muted. Julian was already at his desk, sorting through papers, a cup of coffee beside him, his expression unreadable. "David?" Julian greeted him, his voice calm but with a hint of concern that David didn't miss. "I've been going through everything. We need to talk." David's stomach twisted. He sat down, his fingers lightly tapping on the table in front of him. His mind raced, 1,000 questions flooding his thoughts. Was this it? Was this the moment that would either confirm his worst fears or let him breathe again? Julian didn't waste any time. "I've gone through Ryan's accounts, his financial transactions, and I've found something. It's not a lot yet, but it's enough to make me suspicious. There have been a few large transfers, too large to be a coincidence, moving into an offshore account. It's a setup. The timing is very interesting." David felt the blood drain from his face. Offshore accounts. The very thing Emily had mentioned. It was all too real. He fought to steady his breath. "Can you trace it? Where is it going?" David's voice was tight, his nerves starting to betray him. Julian leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I'm still working on that. I've got some leads, but it's not going to be easy. Offshore accounts are tricky. But what I can tell you for sure is this. Ryan's been setting something up, and the timing lines up with your big deal." David's mind raced. He had trusted Ryan for so long. He had been through thick and thin with him. They had built this empire together. It was hard to swallow that someone he considered a brother could be planning something like this. Could Ryan really betray him? Could the man who had celebrated his successes, shared his failures, now be plotting to take everything? "You're telling me this is happening now?" David asked, his voice faltering for a moment. "Everything points to that," Julian confirmed, his eyes narrowing. "You need to be cautious. I'll keep digging, but what we have so far is enough to raise a red flag. The deal you're about to sign? It might be exactly what Ryan's been waiting for." David felt the weight of the words like a physical blow. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "So, what do I do now?" Julian sighed, standing up to pour himself another cup of coffee before answering. "You have two options. Confront Ryan and risk everything, or wait until we have solid proof. But the longer you wait, the more he can cover his tracks. You can't afford to make this decision based on half-truths." David's mind was spinning. Confronting Ryan, accusing him of betrayal, was a dangerous move. If Ryan was innocent, if he had misunderstood something, it would destroy the trust they had. But if Ryan was guilty, David would be signing away his future. He stood up abruptly, his decision made. "I can't sit on this any longer. David said, his voice firm despite the unease swirling in his chest. I have to confront him. I need to know the truth, no matter how painful it is. Julian nodded, giving him a knowing look. It's going to be hard, David. But you're doing the right thing. The next few hours passed in a blur. David tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to the conversation with Julian. Ryan's betrayal felt more and more like an inevitability with every passing minute. It was hard to think about anything else. Finally, the moment came. David was sitting in the conference room, a contract in front of him, waiting for Ryan to arrive. He tried to focus on the papers to maintain his composure, but the doubt gnawed at him. What if Julian was wrong? What if this was all a misunderstanding? Ryan walked in with his usual easy charm, looking the part of a successful entrepreneur. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his face a picture of confidence, the same face that had always been there in every victory, every triumph. David stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, everything in him screamed to hold back, to let the conversation play out like every other one before. But the truth was clear now. He couldn't unhear what Emily had told him. He couldn't pretend that everything was fine. Ryan, David said, his voice steady but cold. We need to talk. Ryan raised an eyebrow, taking a seat across from him with a smile. What's up, man? Everything good with the deal? We're close, right? David could see the ease in Ryan's demeanor, the calm assurance that everything was moving as planned. But David wasn't fooled anymore. Every word, every gesture, now felt like part of a bigger game, a game where Ryan was the one pulling the strings. David leaned forward, meeting Ryan's gaze with intensity. I know about the offshore accounts. I know you've been planning something behind my back. Ryan's face froze for a moment, the smile slipping from his lips as he tried to regain his composure. But it was too late. The words had been spoken. The truth had been revealed. And now, there was no turning back. What are you talking about? Ryan asked, his voice strained but still trying to maintain an air of control. This is ridiculous, David. You're imagining things. David shook his head, the anger rising in him. No, Ryan, I'm not imagining things. I've seen the transfers, the accounts. You've been setting this up for months. Ryan's expression flickered. For a moment, David saw a crack in the facade, the briefest moment of vulnerability before it was replaced with cold calculation. You think you know everything? Ryan said, his voice growing harsh. You've been blind, David. You've always been the golden boy, always in the spotlight. I've done the work, kept everything running while you took the credit. You think I haven't noticed? This is my time, David. My time to take what's mine. David felt a sharp pang in his chest. The betrayal stung, but the fury was stronger. He had never seen Ryan like this, so consumed by envy, so willing to tear down everything they had built together. You think you deserve more, so you're willing to destroy me? David spat, his voice rising. Everything we've worked for, our company, our friendship, it means nothing to you. Ryan smirked, his eyes cold. You were always the leader, the one everyone praised. I was just the guy who made sure everything worked. You never appreciated it. This is what it's all been for. David's hands balled into fists. I trusted you, Ryan. I thought we were in this together, but now I'm done. You've crossed a line. The room was thick with tension. David's stomach churned with the realization that the man sitting across from him, the man he had once called his best friend, was nothing more than a stranger now. Ryan had been playing him all along. David stood up, his voice firm. I'm going to stop you, Ryan. You won't get away with this, Ryan sneered, rising from his chair. We'll see about that. David left the room, his mind a storm of emotions, doubt, suspicion, betrayal. But one thing was clear. The game had changed. Ryan had shown his cards, and now David had to play his hand carefully. The truth was out. But the battle was far from over. The following days felt like a blur of suspicion and uncertainty. David's mind was a maze of questions, each one more difficult to answer than the last. As much as he wanted to confront Ryan in that very moment, he knew he couldn't. Not without irrefutable proof. Not without solid evidence to back up the betrayal Ryan had so blatantly confessed to. David sat in his office, staring at the half-empty glass of water on his desk. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting thin slats of light across the room, but it did nothing to brighten his mood. His company, the empire he had built, was in jeopardy, and the man who had been his closest friend was the one pulling the strings in the shadows. He knew the next step. He had to get to the bottom of this, but to do that, he needed the truth. And the truth, in this case, was buried deep, somewhere in the labyrinth of financial records, offshore accounts, and confidential business dealings. To find it, David turned to the only person he could fully trust at that moment: Julian. Julian was more than just a private investigator. He had been David's go-to person for any high-stakes situation. Whether it was a potential threat to the company or a delicate business negotiation, Julian had always been there to sift through the mess and find clarity. If anyone could uncover the truth about Ryan's plans, it was him. David picked up his phone, dialing Julian's number. As the phone rang, his heart pounded in his chest, as if he could feel the weight of the moment in his bones. He didn't want to admit it to himself, but every passing second of waiting made him more anxious. What if Ryan had covered his tracks too well? What if Julian came back with nothing but vague leads? "David," Julian's voice crackled through the phone. "Got your message." "What's going on?" David's breath caught for a moment. He'd never sounded this stressed before. "I need you to dig into Ryan. Everything. I need proof that he's been siphoning money off the company, moving funds into offshore accounts, making backdoor deals. He's been setting this up for months, Julian. I'm not asking for theories anymore. I need facts." Julian paused for a long moment. "I understand. I'll dig into everything. It'll take some time, but I'll find what he's been hiding." David let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "I need it as soon as possible. I can't wait much longer." "I'll keep you posted," Julian said before the line went quiet. David sat back in his chair, the room suddenly feeling colder. He wasn't sure what was worse, the suspicion gnawing at him, or the fact that he had no idea how deep Ryan's betrayal ran. But one thing was clear. This was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. Over the next few days, David tried to stay focused on running the business, but the constant tension in his mind made it impossible to concentrate. Every email, every phone call, every meeting felt like a distraction from the larger problem at hand. He kept thinking back to that conversation with Ryan, the smugness in his voice, the coldness in his eyes. David couldn't shake the image of his best friend, the man he had trusted for years, casually planning to ruin him. But there was no turning back now. He had crossed the point of no return. Ryan had shown his cards, and now David was waiting to see if he could find the winning hand. It was late one night when Julian finally called. "David, I've got something." Julian's voice was low and serious. "I've been able to trace some of the funds. Ryan's been making transfers into an offshore account that's registered under an alias. The amounts are significant, and the timing lines up perfectly with when you two were finalizing that deal." David felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had feared the worst, but hearing it confirmed out loud made it all the more real. Ryan wasn't just dipping into the company's funds. He was preparing for a full-blown takeover. Julian continued, "There's more. I've got access to some of Ryan's communications with a few competitors. They've been in talks about acquisitions and a hostile takeover. The company you've worked so hard to build, Ryan's positioning himself to walk away with it." David slammed his fist against the desk, the sound of impact vibrating through the room. Anger surged through him, sharp and bitter. He had built this company from nothing, and now his best friend was trying to take it all away. The betrayal stung, but the anger was something else entirely. "Is there anything else?" David's voice was tight, his body stiff with rage. "Yeah," Julian said, his tone even. "There's one last thing. I found some paperwork hidden in Ryan's digital files, showing plans to move a substantial amount of company assets. It looks like he's been lining up investments in his name rather than the company's." If you hadn't caught this, the deal would have gone through, and Ryan would have owned everything. David leaned back in his chair, his hand running through his hair as he processed the information. It was worse than he had imagined. Ryan wasn't just betraying him on a personal level, he was betraying the very foundation of their success, everything they had worked for together. "Thanks, Julian, I appreciate it. I'll take it from here." David ended the call, his fingers trembling slightly as he set the phone down. He had the evidence. Now he just had to figure out what to do with it. The next morning, David walked into the office with a new resolve. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with a sharpened focus. Every person he passed in the hallway seemed to look at him differently, sensing the change in the air. They could feel it too. David had always been the kind of leader who operated with careful consideration, but today, there was a fire in his eyes. As he sat down at his desk, his thoughts drifted back to Ryan. There was no way he could let this go. Ryan had gone too far, and now David had to do whatever it took to stop him. The battle was no longer just about business. It was personal. Ryan had taken something from him, something that David would never get back, no matter how this played out. David stared at the files Julian had sent him, the damning proof of Ryan's treachery staring back at him. The offshore accounts, the secret investments, the communications with competitors. It was all there, laid out in black and white. The plan was clear. Ryan had been setting up his own empire, one built on the ashes of everything they had created together. David's thoughts raced. He could feel the anger rising in him again, but this time he forced it down. He couldn't afford to be reckless. He had to be calculated. He had to strike at the right moment, when he could do the most damage to Ryan's plan. For the first time in a long time, David felt the weight of the decisions he had to make. This was bigger than a betrayal. This was about protecting everything he had worked for, everything he had built. And he wasn't going to let Ryan destroy it. As the day wore on, David's resolve hardened. He wasn't going to let Ryan get away with this. The investigation had given him the evidence he needed, but it wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed to get ahead of Ryan, to take back control before it was too late. And as the sun set over the city, casting long shadows over his office, David knew that the next step was going to be the most important one of all. He couldn't afford to make another mistake. The game had changed, and now David had the upper hand. But how far would he be willing to go to protect everything he had built? David sat in his office, the cold glow of the city lights filtering in through the glass windows. His hands rested on the desk, fingers interlaced, mind racing with everything he had learned. The betrayal was no longer a whisper in the dark, no longer a feeling he could push aside. It was real. It was tangible. And now he had to face it head-on. The weight of the evidence Julian had gathered sat heavily on him. Ryan, the man who had been his best friend, the partner he had trusted more than anyone, was actively plotting to steal everything David had worked for. Every transfer, every hidden document, every shady conversation, it was all right there in front of him. And yet, despite all the proof, David still had one question echoing in his mind. Why? Why would Ryan, someone who had stood by his side through thick and thin, choose this path? Was it greed? Was it jealousy? Or was it something deeper? Something that had festered for years, silently growing until it finally erupted. David had his answers, at least the answers that made sense on paper, but that wasn't enough. He needed to look Ryan in the eye. He needed to confront him, face to face, and hear the truth from his lips. There was no other way to move forward. There was no way to heal without understanding. The clock ticked on, each minute stretching longer than the last. David checked his watch, nearly 8 p.m. He hadn't spoken to Ryan all day, and part of him had hoped for some sign that things could go back to normal. But that wasn't going to happen. He knew it. Ryan knew it. The deal they had worked so hard for, the empire they had built together, it was all on the line. And it wasn't just the company anymore. It was David's trust in everything he had known about their friendship. David stood up from behind his desk, grabbing the files that Julian had prepared for him. His steps were purposeful as he walked to the door, his jaw clenched with the force of the emotions swirling inside him. He was calm, he told himself. He had to be. This conversation would determine everything: the future of his company, his reputation, and his relationship with Ryan. When he stepped into the elevator, the silence around him seemed to close in. It was just him now. No more secrets. No more pretending. He was going to confront Ryan, and he wasn't going to back down. The drive to Ryan's penthouse was quiet, with only the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of the wind breaking the silence. David's mind replayed every conversation he'd had with Ryan over the years. The laughter, the shared victories. The late-night talks about their vision for the company. How had it all gone so wrong? The building loomed ahead, a sleek structure of glass and steel, towering over the city. As David parked and made his way inside, the weight of the moment settled over him. This was it. He was about to walk into a confrontation that could change everything. There was no turning back. Ryan's penthouse was everything David had expected. Expensive, opulent, with sweeping views of the city below. It had always been a symbol of Ryan's success, a place where he could escape the world and be surrounded by luxury. But tonight, it felt hollow, the gleaming surfaces and plush furniture unable to mask the tension in the air. David knocked on the door, the sound loud in the stillness of the night. After a few moments, the door swung open, and Ryan stood there, wearing his trademark grin, the one that had once been a symbol of their camaraderie. "David," Ryan said, his voice light, almost too casual. "What's going on? Come in, come in." David stepped inside, the scent of expensive cologne and aged whiskey mixing in the air. Ryan's usual charm was still there, but David could see the subtle tension in his posture, the way his eyes flicked briefly to the stack of documents on the table. Ryan wasn't as calm as he wanted to appear. David didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know what you've been doing, Ryan," he said, his voice firm, steady. The words were out before he could second-guess them, but they felt right. "I know about the offshore accounts, the transfers, the deals you've been making behind my back." Ryan's grin faltered for just a split second, but it was enough. David caught it, the fleeting moment of panic before Ryan quickly regained his composure. "David," Ryan said slowly, his tone shifting, "you've got it all wrong. This, whatever you think you know, it's not what it looks like." David could feel the anger rising in him, but he held it in check. He wasn't here to argue. He was here to confront the truth. "I know what I've seen, Ryan," David shot back. "I've seen the proof, the transactions, the plans you've been making. I know you've been plotting to take over everything we've worked for." Ryan stepped back, his hand gripping the edge of the table. His eyes darted to the files David was holding, then back to David, a flicker of something like regret crossing his features. For a moment, David thought Ryan might actually come clean. But then he spoke, and the mask slid back into place. "You don't get it, David," Ryan said, his voice low, almost resigned. "I've been trying to keep things together for years. You've always been the golden boy, the one everyone praised, the one everyone looked up to. But what about me, huh? What about all the work I put in, the sacrifices I made, all for you?" You think I didn't deserve a piece of the pie? You think I didn't earn it? David's heart sank. So it was true. This wasn't just business. It was about Ryan's ego, his feeling of being overshadowed. So this is about jealousy? David asked, his voice tight. This is what it's come to? Ryan let out a bitter laugh. Jealousy? Maybe. But it's more than that. I built this company with you. I made it happen just as much as you did, but you always got the credit. You always took the spotlight. And now, when it was finally my time to step up, you're going to take it all away from me. No. I won't let you. David took a step forward, his fists clenched, but his voice remained calm, steady. You're wrong, Ryan. You're wrong about everything. I would have helped you. I would have recognized you for everything you've done. But you chose this path. You chose to betray me, to betray everything we've built together. Ryan's face twisted with anger, the facade of calm slipping. I didn't have a choice, David. You never saw me. You never saw what I was capable of. David shook his head, disappointment flooding his chest. I trusted you, Ryan. We built this company together. You didn't need to do this. You didn't need to throw it all away for greed. Ryan stepped closer, his expression cold. You're naive, David. You'll see. I'll be the one who walks away with everything. David's gaze hardened, and in that moment, everything became crystal clear. He wasn't just fighting for his company anymore. He was fighting for his legacy, his reputation, and the integrity of everything he had ever built. And he wasn't going to let Ryan tear it all down. You're finished, Ryan, David said, his voice low but unwavering. You've made your move, but it's too late. I've already frozen the accounts. The evidence is all here. You've been caught. Ryan's eyes widened in shock. For the first time, he looked vulnerable, trapped in his own web of lies. You're not walking away from this, David continued. Not this time. I'm done with you. Ryan stood there, speechless, as the weight of David's words sank in. He had nothing left. His schemes had unraveled, and the man he thought he could manipulate wasn't backing down. David turned to leave, his hand on the door. Enjoy the fallout, Ryan, he said over his shoulder, his voice colder than he had ever intended. This is over. David left Ryan's penthouse, his mind still racing with adrenaline and disbelief. But as the door clicked shut behind him, something in David changed. He was no longer the man who had blindly trusted his best friend. He was the man who had taken control of his own destiny, and he wasn't going to let anyone destroy what he had built. Ryan had made his move, but David was the one who had come out on top. Now he had to focus on moving forward, repairing the damage Ryan had caused, and ensuring that no one would ever be able to threaten everything he had worked for again. As David stepped into the cool night air, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. It was over, and now it was time to rebuild. The future was his, and no one, not even Ryan, could take that from him. The days following the confrontation with Ryan were a blur for David Sullivan. As the dust began to settle from the betrayal that had rocked his world, he found himself at a crossroads. There was no denying the sense of victory he felt. Ryan had been exposed, his manipulations laid bare. But even in the face of this triumph, there was an undeniable weight pressing down on David's shoulders. For years, he had built his empire alongside someone he considered a brother. Now, that brother had turned against him. It wasn't just the company at stake, it was everything David had known. The trust, the camaraderie, the history. It had all been shattered in one conversation, and as much as he wanted to feel relief, a quiet ache lingered, a sense of loss that he couldn't shake. David sat alone in his office late one evening, staring out at the skyline. The city sprawled before him, an endless sea of lights and possibilities. But beneath the surface, there was something different about the way David saw it now. The once dazzling view of his success felt a little dimmer. The towering glass buildings, the sprawling roads, the buzzing streets, they all seemed to carry the weight of the last few months. His company had survived the storm, but the emotional toll of the betrayal left him questioning everything he had built. But life, as it often does, had a way of moving forward, whether he was ready or not. The phone rang, pulling David from his thoughts. It was Emily. "David," she said, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and determination. "I just wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" David smiled, a small but genuine smile, at the sound of her voice. Emily had become more than just the waitress who had warned him of Ryan's betrayal. She had become a confidant, someone he could rely on in the midst of chaos. Her integrity, her courage, her selflessness. She had shown him the kind of loyalty he had once thought only existed in fairy tales. She had saved him, not just from the financial ruin Ryan had planned, but from losing his trust in humanity altogether. "I'm doing okay," David replied, leaning back in his chair. "It's been a long road, but I'm getting there." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm glad to hear that," Emily said softly. "I know it's been tough, but you're not alone in this, David. You've got people who care about you." David's heart warmed at her words. "I know. I appreciate that, Emily. More than you know." They spoke for a few more minutes, sharing updates on the business and discussing the next steps. The legal battles with Ryan were still ongoing, but David was confident they would soon come to a close. With the evidence he had gathered, Ryan's claims were crumbling, and his financial backers were beginning to distance themselves. The future of the company was secure. But as the conversation wound down, David couldn't shake the feeling that the real work had only just begun. Ryan's betrayal had left scars, deep ones, that would take time to heal. Trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. And though David had been through the ringer, he knew that the journey was far from over. The following week, David made a decision. It was time to move forward. It was time to rebuild, but this time, he would do it differently. He would rebuild not just the company, but his life, and part of that meant acknowledging what he had learned from this entire ordeal. He realized that, for all the years he had spent in the company, for all the victories and successes, he had neglected something crucial: the people who had truly made it all possible. Emily had been a revelation in more ways than one. Not only had she saved him from financial ruin, but she had also reminded him of something he had lost sight of: a sense of purpose beyond the bottom line. David had spent so much time focused on growth and success that he had forgotten about the importance of loyalty, of cultivating the relationships that truly mattered. Ryan had been a partner, yes, but it was Emily who had shown him the kind of character and integrity he needed in his corner. It was time to stop living in the shadow of what had been and start embracing what could be. David called Emily the next day. "Emily," he said, his voice full of resolve, "I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for me. You've proven yourself in ways I never expected, and because of that, I want to offer you something important." There was a moment of silence before Emily responded. "David, you don't have to." "I do," he interrupted, his tone firm but kind. "I want to offer you a permanent position in my leadership team. You've shown me that you're more than capable of handling the responsibility, and I want to give you the chance to grow with this company. No one deserves it more than you." Emily was silent for a moment, the weight of the offer sinking in. "David, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," David replied, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Take some time to think about it. But I believe in you, Emily. And I want you on this team. You've earned it." The days that followed were a whirlwind of decisions. Emily accepted the offer, and David began working closely with her to integrate her into the leadership team. Her fresh perspective, Her dedication and her unwavering loyalty had proven to be exactly what the company needed. Together, they began working on a new expansion project, one that would take the company to international markets, pushing boundaries and setting new standards. But it wasn't just about business. David knew that the heart of the company was its people, and Emily's role in that was more important than any financial gain. The work was demanding, but David could see the fire in Emily's eyes, the same drive he had seen in himself when he was starting out. She was capable of far more than she knew, and he was determined to help her unlock that potential. For the first time in what felt like forever, David could see a bright future ahead. The road would not be without challenges. There were still legal battles to win, still damage to repair. But with Emily by his side, the weight of the world felt a little lighter. Weeks passed, and the company began to flourish in ways David hadn't imagined. Their efforts to expand into international markets were paying off, and Emily's leadership skills were proving to be invaluable. It wasn't just about numbers or deals anymore. It was about creating a legacy that would last. It was about leaving behind something meaningful. One evening, as David stood in his office overlooking the city, he realized how far he had come. He had faced betrayal, doubt, and fear. But now, with Emily's help, he was building something stronger than ever before. The future was unwritten, but for the first time in a long time, David felt confident about what lay ahead. He wasn't just moving forward in business, he was moving forward in life. And as he turned away from the window, ready to dive back into the work that awaited him, he knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of a new chapter. As the months went by, David and Emily continued to work side by side, leading the company into a new era. The past betrayals and struggles had been replaced with renewed purpose and vision. The company not only survived but thrived, expanding into new markets, innovating, and creating lasting partnerships with those who shared their values. Emily had proven to be more than just a savior. She was now an irreplaceable leader, someone who David could rely on to guide the company forward with integrity and insight. David's trust in people had been tested, but through it all, he had learned the true meaning of loyalty, resilience, and the importance of doing business the right way. The company's success was no longer measured just by profits, but by the trust and respect they had earned from both their clients and their employees. And while the journey ahead still held challenges, David now knew he was ready to face them, not alone, but with a strong team by his side, people who truly mattered. Do you think David made the right choice by trusting Emily, or should he have been more cautious after Ryan's betrayal? What would you have done in David's shoes? Would you have been able to forgive and move forward? Or would you have let the betrayal linger? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please rate the video from 1 to 10, and don't forget to comment and like it if you want more content like this. Your feedback means a lot and helps us keep creating these engaging stories for you. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on future videos filled with inspiring stories, life lessons, and much more. Thank you for watching, and remember, the future is full of endless possibilities. Keep moving forward.